Mr. Cohen, I'm worried that this deal simply continues a trend of media consolidation, a trend that has led to increasing prices for consumers who have seen their bills go up at more than twice the rate of inflation since the mid-1990s. Earlier this week, news broke out about a J.P. Morgan report in which Wall Street analysts apparently recommended that cable companies continue to raise prices on consumers. And as you've admitted, prices might go up even faster. And we've talked about your comment. Mr. Cohen, don't your investors, people who invest in Comcast, expect Comcast to leverage its market share by getting as much money as it can out of consumers?
I think our investors want us to have the best multi-channel video and broadband business in the country, and I think that includes getting whatever prices the market will bear, but it also includes providing an extraordinarily high-quality video and broadband experience. And I think we have made, and you can look at our analyst calls, we have made it a point of significant discussion, not only for us, but for the entire cable industry, about our need to continue to invest to be able to compete better against national and global competitors who are increasingly coming into this space. So yes to your question, but I think also, to be fair, yes to the business reasoning underlying this transaction, which is to provide us with the opportunity to create a better experience for consumers.
Well, my concern is that as Comcast continues to get bigger, it'll have even more power to exercise that leverage, to squeeze consumers. And part of the reason I'm concerned about this is because Comcast's own CFO has pretty much told Wall Street that that's what Comcast does. During a fall 2012 conference call, an analyst from Goldman Sachs noted that cable had a big share of the broadband market and asked Comcast CFO, quote, "Is there a way to exercise pricing leverage to a greater extent?" And Comcast CFO said, quote, "I think that we have actually exercised some pricing leverage. We've increased the cost of the service by roughly $4 to $5 per customer per month over the last few years," end quote. It's understandable that Comcast has a responsibility to look out for its investors. But I'm concerned that the bigger and more dominant the company becomes, the less incentive they have to look out for consumers, and the more power they have to squeeze them. Mr. Kimmelman, and I think this goes to bundling too, because I know that in some of those talks, right after the talk of this acquisition, there was pledges to push bundling, to upsell your product. Mr. Kimmelman, won't this give Comcast more leverage?
Absolutely, Senator Franken. Even those who are arguing about these other competitors, mostly they're giving us examples of things either that just show the market is highly concentrated but not monopolistic, or they're quite futuristic, and we did use the U-verse numbers, Professor Yu, in our analysis. There's enormous market power here that could be leveraged, and on top of that, there is the very popular NBCU programming that can be leveraged. And that, understandably, maximizes profits for Comcast to keep it in a big bundle, to charge as much as possible, and the increasing trend for consumers is to buy at least two services, broadband and video, if not three. And so they know that they can drive up prices to competitors and benefit from raising their rivals' costs. And if some people want to drop those rival services, it is most likely going to be business going to them. That is where their financial incentive lies, and then we'd expect them to follow through on that. Those are the kinds of concerns that, on the public record, were in the FCC ruling on NBCU and Comcast. and in the DOJ, and I imagine they will be relevant here as well.
Senator Franken, can I jump in on that?
Sure.
Thank you. Understandably, this is a really complicated matter, but I think if we boil it down, the folks at home that bills keep going up are expecting more, and they're not getting more channels, and they're not getting more choice. And so, Mr. Cohen pointed out that, content costs are up 98%, while their subscription fees were only up 50. Well, that's an extreme pressure on their gross margins. Yeah. And any business owner would know that what's the incentive to add more product when it's your highest gross margin product and it's your number one cost? So I think there has to be effective ways to encourage new competition in the marketplace. I mean, the marketplace that we're going into is a $170 billion marketplace. It's larger than all four major sports combined. There are 60 networks that are fighting over that space in the sports area. The golf lifestyle market has one, and the only channel is that of Golf Channel, which is owned by Mr. Cohen. Now, a good real-world example that I think everybody ought to know of how hard it is for original programmers is that we understood that Golf Channel was owned by Comcast, so we didn't start there. They didn't have a huge incentive to launch us. But what we did is we started with Time Warner Cable and some other folks. And Time Warner Cable, from the CEO to the programming people, could not have been more constructive in their help to help us get our programming on the air. As soon as this merger was announced, that definitely softened quite a bit. And, I'm here to say that Time Warner Cable did a wonderful job trying to get more product to the consumer, and since that time when this was announced, it's become a lot more difficult for us. And the only thing I can think about is because they own the only competitor in the space.
And thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. You look surprised, Mr. Cohen, when I talked about upselling and bundling. Neil Smith, an executive at Comcast, went on a phone call with Wall Street analysts, said this: as I said, I think the revenue synergies are greater than the cost synergies. On the revenue synergy side, the first would be in the residential area where we would seek to bundle more, and that is call center training. That's teaching people to sell another RTU on a call, on a service call, fix a billing problem, upsell a third product. So just bundling better. That's what I was talking about. And you look kind of puzzled when I brought it up.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what you were referring to, but I think that obviously for us and for others in the cable industry, it's been a very effective strategy and one that consumers like, to purchase multiple products from a single provider, getting a single bill.
You were told by the FCC to actually stop that and to stop pushing bundles. But I got other questions.
Okay. Well, I'll be very short, and I know sometimes I'm too long, but all I will say is the FCC did not tell us to stop bundling and pushing bundles. They simply asked us to have a standalone broadband offering, which we did have and which we continue to have.
The FCC sent you a letter saying that a consent decree imposes a detailed compliance plan requiring Comcast to undertake numerous activities, training its customer service representatives and retail sales personnel to reinforce their awareness and familiarity with the performance starter service.
That's the deal was that we would create a new broadband service, which was a standalone service, 6 meg down for $49.95 a month. And we did create that tier, and the commission raised concerns about how we were marketing the tier, whether our call center employees knew about it. We quickly resolved the matter. We may have had a difference of opinion. We quickly resolved the matter.
You paid a fine.
Extended the commitment for another year, so that
you paid a fine.
We did pay a fine. But all I'm saying is there was no prohibition.
And then you were told
no prohibition against bundling.
Tell your call center people to emphasize these standalone, not to upsell,
Not to emphasize
push
it, to
upselling.
offer
It's
it.
very different than the condition.
To offer it. We were not, there's nothing in the FCC order to prevent us from bundling. I just want to say that we agreed, in addition to our bundling strategy for somebody who called, said, I only want to buy broadband, to have an option, a standalone broadband option.
When you train people to upsell, you're not training them to make people want to go for the standalone broadband, something that you were fined for not doing.
We are allowed to train people to upsell. All we have to do is when somebody says, I want to buy broadband alone, that our call center employees have to be aware of the standalone product and sell it to people.
Okay, you seem like a pretty good salesman. I know how people on call centers can emphasize certain things over others, and I think that's my fear here. I want to talk about two other things. I am so sorry, Madam Chair, but Mr. Kimmelman, Comcast has argued that this deal won't jeopardize the open nature of the Internet. In the public interest statement that it filed with the FCC yesterday, Comcast promised regulators that it has no incentive to interfere with Internet traffic. I'm not convinced. If this deal goes through, Comcast will control about 40% or more of the broadband market, and it won't just own all those pipes, it will also own a bunch of content, because it bought NBC Universal a few years ago and the 20 or so cable networks that came with it. Mr. Kimmelman, doesn't that give Comcast both the power and the incentive to manipulate Internet traffic in its favor? And didn't we see a preview of that with the recent deal Comcast struck with Netflix?
Senator Franken, if you go back to all the big numbers Mr. Cohen had and Professor Yu had about the many myriad interconnections of the Internet all around, all accurate in that space, but when you get close to the home, to the customer, the last mile, the ports that have to bring in the video traffic, one player, two players, sometimes more, hardly ever, and one of them is Comcast combining with Time Warner. So that part of the market is quite concentrated. There are, as Professor Yu says, a lot of changes going on in the Internet. There are a lot of different kind of interconnection relationships. What we also see is a lot more proposals for usage-based pricing that wasn't there before, data caps.
Can you explain what those are?
Just that instead of getting a flat fee for eat as much as you want for your Internet usage, that above a certain level, your prices go up. Or that you pay per certain amount of usage and there's no flat fee.
Unless it's a Comcast product like Xfinity.
So there are some products that are dealt differently with by cable companies and under a different set of standards and arguably preferential to what a competitor has. So there are dangers when the market is concentrated at that point of interconnection of ways to manipulate. And this is where I go back to my analogy of an octopus that has all these tentacles out there. There is net neutrality, there's a last mile connection, but then there are the different pricing schemes, and then there are the different interconnection and peering arrangements. There are many ways in which a number of tentacles could be used to favor one product over another if it's financially advantageous to that broadband provider with market power, which would be Comcast Time Warner.
Thank you. I have one last question, and it's going to be short, I think. Mr. Cohen, on page 34 of your testimony, you have a section called Promises Made and Promises Kept, Our Record. And you say when Comcast makes promises, it keeps them. And you talk about the conditions that the FCC imposed on Comcast when it acquired NBC Universal. And here's what I found puzzling. You say, out of these conditions, the FCC has only found it necessary to look at one issue. And that was the issue we just talked about on standalone broadband. But isn't it true that the FCC had to look at the neighborhooding condition? That's the condition that prohibited you from favoring NBC content. When CNBC is neighborhooded, you were neighborhooding it with all the other 24-hour cable news channels, with CNBC with MSNBC, with Fox, with CNN, but you put Bloomberg way out in the nosebleed seats, so people couldn't find Bloomberg. And because they couldn't find Bloomberg, they wouldn't go to Bloomberg, and Bloomberg could charge less for its advertising, and NBC would get more eyeballs for people who are interested in 24-hour business news, and you could charge more. Isn't that another condition that they looked at?
So generally speaking, that characterization is just not accurate. And what we had in the Bloomberg neighborhooding area were interpretive differences between Bloomberg and Comcast as to what the condition meant. And I can go through as much detail as you want, but
the FCC certainly looked at it, didn't it?
Ultimately, there was a complaint filed, and when we lost the complaint at the FCC, we have resolved the matter with Bloomberg. We are in compliance with that condition.
Okay, but let me ask you, is this true then, that out of these conditions, the FCC has only found necessary to look at one issue? Is that still true?
It is. What is true is that we only had a compliance issue with one condition. The Bloomberg issue was not a compliance issue. It was an interpretive issue. And when the interpretation was resolved, we were able to resolve our differences and our partnership with Bloomberg. We remain Bloomberg's largest distributor, and we have an excellent relationship.
Here is the FCC's order. In this memorandum opinion and order, we affirm Media Bureau orders that direct Comcast to place Bloomberg television in news neighborhoods consistent with the condition of the Comcast NBC Universal Order. That is looking at that. And you right here, in your testimony, and you're sworn under oath here, you say, out of these, and then the brackets conditions, that's what we're referring to, the FCC has only found it necessary to look at one issue. And you're saying they didn't look at this issue?
What I'm saying is it was not a compliance issue, it was an interpretation issue.
Okay, well, I'll
let go back to the Media Bureau order. Because, let me just go, I'll give you an example. Because the ultimate order of the Media Bureau was that we had to neighborhood Bloomberg where I believe it was either 4 or more or 5 or more other news channels. The FCC order didn't have that definitional issue. We didn't know what a news neighborhood was. And we tend not to neighborhood our news channels the way you described in your question, where all the news channels are together. So one of the interpretive issues that we needed to have resolved was what was a news neighborhood. And that's what the dispute in front of the commission was.
I think, and Madam Chair, this is the end, my friend.
And by the way, if any of the witnesses have to use the restroom, you really can come back and we'll take you back there. I know it's been going on a couple hours.
You really undercut my big conclusion. I was going to say...
Senator Franken, please continue. I really meant that. I was just going to let them know.
I was going to say that I think the interpretation here is on what the word look means. And I think everyone knows what the word look means. Thank you.
And Madam Chair, if I can, I will acknowledge that the word look may not have been the best chosen word. But the point I was trying to get at was whether there were compliance issues. And I don't think that was a compliance issue. So I will acknowledge that we should have had a better use of words in the written testimony, and I apologize for that.
Accept it.
Thank you.
Okay.